start for story? I forgot who was next. My story is, it takes place back in the late 1800s, pioneer times. There was a little girl named Sarah who lived with her family up in Canada. Sarah lived with her family up in Canada, and this story takes place around the harvest time, because at that time, Canada and the United States didn't have a regular Thanksgiving for the whole country. Every family or village or group of farms could decide on their own harvest festival, and they would have a big feast and give thanks at that. There wasn't a Thanksgiving that everybody celebrated. And this year that I'm talking about, when Sarah and her family were going to celebrate the harvest festival, it was right at the time of the harvest moon. Did you guys know we were going to have a harvest moon this month? Yeah. It's the first full moon after the solstice, and that's the harvest moon. I have to think that this year, when I'm telling you about Sarah, was probably a little chillier than the year we're having right now. Because they had just barely gotten all the crops in when things started to freeze over. So Sarah and her family were preparing for the feast. Sarah's mother had asked her to look after their gran while she was sleeping. And everybody else was in the kitchen making delicious things to eat for the feast. Sarah watched her gran for a while, and then both of them fell asleep. Pretty soon, when Sarah woke up, she could hear her mother's voice in the kitchen next door. You know, I don't think Gran's going to make it for another feast. Her mother was talking to one of their neighbors. The doc says there's nothing more he could do for her. I think this will probably be her last harvest festival. Well, Sarah couldn't believe it. Well, sure, Gran had been sick, but she looked over at her grandmother, who was just waking up. Gran, are you okay? Oh, yes, honey. I'm just waking up, she said. But now that Sarah looked at her, she didn't look all that well. Why are you looking so sad, child? Today ought to be one of your happiest days. We're going to have such a lovely feast. Turkey and venison and corn and that sauce your mother made last year. What was it called again? The red sauce. I'd never had that before. Cranberries, Gran? Cranberry sauce? Oh, yes. Oh, I can't wait to taste that cranberry sauce again. Sarah thought, we didn't have time to harvest cranberries this year. We just barely got all the other crops in. If this is going to be Gran's last harvest feast, she should have cranberries. I'll be right back, Gran, said Sarah. And off she ran. She grabbed a wooden bucket and started off. Now, Pa had said that the kids were never to go into the cranberry field, into that bog by themselves. It was too dangerous. But Sarah figured she could be careful, and off she ran. Her sister called after her, if you're going to go get nuts, you better take Lizzie. Oh, no, thought Sarah. Lizzie's only 5. She'll be sure to tattle. Pretty soon, Lizzie was catching up with her. Sarah, if you don't slow down, I'm going to tell Pa. All right, you can come along, but don't say anything. Okay. The two of them went along. Pretty soon, Lizzie realized they weren't looking for nuts. Are we going to the cranberry bog? Pa says we'll get drowned if we go to the cranberry bog. You don't have to go, said Sarah. You just stay right up here on this little hill where I can watch you, and I'll go into the bog. I don't know. You can play with my rag doll when we get back. Okay. And Lizzie sat down on the hill and started to play with the grass. And Sarah went into the bog very carefully. Now, harvesting cranberries is hard work, especially if you have to be careful not to step in the wet and mushy places. Sometimes there are mats over where the water is deep, and you have to be super careful. But Sarah was. She harvested and harvested for a long time till her bucket was almost full. And then she heard Lizzie. "Sarah, look! I made a crowd out of the grass! Lizzie, no!" She started to run toward her. She tripped on a tree trunk and fell headlong into the bog. "Lizzie!" Sarah dropped the cranberries and ran as fast as she could. "Lizzie!" But Lizzie was disappearing into the water. Nothing but hands. Sarah whipped off her shawl and threw it. "Grab the shawl! Grab the shawl, Lizzie!" But Lizzie's hands disappeared. Sarah thought quickly. She tied the shawl around her ankle, and she tied the other end around a tree, and she leaned over the bank and put her own hands deep into the cold, mucky water. There were Lizzie's hands. She grabbed them tight and pulled with all her might and got her little sister out of the bog. But Lizzie was pale and white, and Lizzie's lips were blue, and she wasn't breathing. Think, Sarah, think. What was it that Pa did when Will fell into the river last summer? He put him over a barrel. She looked around. There was a tree trunk. She dragged her sister and put her over the tree trunk that had fallen on the ground. And she whacked her back, and she kneaded and pushed. "Come on, Lizzie, come on!" But Lizzie's face stayed pale and white, and Lizzie's lips stayed blue. She didn't breathe. Oh, Sarah, you're going to have to run back and get Pa. I don't know if we have time. Maybe I can carry her. Oh, come on, Lizzie, please. I'm so sorry, please. Lizzie spit water out of her lungs. Sarah was never any happier to hear anybody cough in all her life. She rolled her little sister over, and Lizzie looked up at her. "Sarah, am I drowned?" "No, Lizzie, you're not drowned." She wrapped her in the shawl, and she half walked, half carried her back to the house. That night, for the harvest feast, they didn't have cranberry sauce, but the whole family sat around the table, and they had turkey and venison, potatoes and corn, and they were all very grateful. Pa said, "I reckon we're especially grateful for the cranberry bog harvest." Lizzie was puzzled. "Pa, we didn't bring those berries back." Sarah smiled at her sister. "He means you, silly." They joined hands and sang their favorite grace. "Oh, the Lord is good to me, and so I thank the Lord for giving me the things I need, the sun and the rain and the apple seed. The Lord is good to me." Bindi Donner.